Hello, hello. We are here to talk about the ultimate rent collection strategy so that you can streamline your business and get to the best parts of being a landlord, which, yes, includes collecting that sweet, sweet rental revenue. So, here's what you're going to learn today. We are going to go over the most common rent collection methods that people are using, along with how some of these popular methods could be leading you to unintentionally break the law in ways that you can protect yourself. I'm also going to teach you how to automate the most time-consuming parts of rent collection so that you can focus on other things, whether that's spending time with your family, expanding your portfolio, whatever you'd like. You don't have to get into the nitty-gritty and make this a super manual process anymore, because there are tools that can really help you out, and I'm going to teach you how to use them. All right. So to set the scene, let's talk a little bit about the current rental landscape. So there are a lot of different components when we talk about rent. There are significant conversations about how much to charge for rent, the way that rents have been increasing over time. And we're going to kind of sidestep those conversations for now just to focus on actual rent collection and some strategies there. But it's important to understand the full lay of the land. So with that in mind, annually in the United States, tenants pay $485 billion, that's with a B, $billion as rent. Okay, every single year, that's what's going out. The most popular collection methods are, of course, going to be some of the old school ones, including cash payments, paper checks, money orders. Some people are still accepting cashier's checks. It really just depends on setup. Of course, you have some of the newer guys in there too, like ACH payments, online platforms like Zelle and Venmo. We're going to go over some of those. And of course, you have property management software like TurboTenant, which is making it all easier. So let's dive in a little bit deeper, but specifically into some of the problem sides of how rent is currently rolling. And you got it. There's a little tiny poll here just for fun. I'm curious if you know how much the estimated total rental debt of the U.S. is as it stands. So we're going to pop just a little poll here to see if you can get the right answer. I think you'll be shocked. I was a little shocked. Well, let's get into it. All right. So, very interesting. We have quite a few answers rolling in. I'll give you about 10 more seconds if you want to click in and get your answer as well. You don't get anything for getting this right except my kudos and a little tiny round of applause. So just do your best. You might be as shocked as I was when we wrap it up. Okay. So how much is the estimated total rent debt of the United States? Well, wonderful audience. You guys did a pretty good job. There's a pretty even split between some of these responses. Those of you who said $9.8 billion are correct. As Americans, we owe quite a bit in rent, which is interesting to see, especially when we visualize it by the actual map of the United States. So this map came from the National Equity Atlas. The darker areas are where there's more rental debt owed. The lighter areas are, of course, the opposite. So that's where there's less rental debt owed. There are many different factors that contribute to these figures. Specifically, like if we take a look at Alaska, not to pick on you, Alaska, but it's lighter, and a significant part of that is because it has a lower population. So also what you're paying for rent in Alaska is not going to be the same as what you're paying for rent in, let's say, one of these California cities. But this helps you understand that this is a widespread problem, and even more so when we look at how families are impacted. So currently, or at least with the most recent data, 4.7 million households are behind on rent. So this is also a chart from the National Equity Alliance. That 4.7 million household figures shakes out to 13% of American households. So while that's lower than the staggering 20% peaks we saw in the height of COVID, it's still a significant number of renter households past due. That strikes fear in the heart of a lot of landlords, because it's not like you can 100% control people paying rent, right? But what we're going to do today is give you strategies so that you can get it as honed in as possible so that you are setting yourself up to get on time in full payments every single month. You might be like, Krista, that sounds really hard. I don't know where to start. Don't worry, I do. So the first place that I want you to start is actually not when you're trying to collect rent at all. I want you to start at the very beginning of your process with your tenant screening. So if you are leveraging a comprehensive tenant screening process, you're going to be better able to discern potential tenants who have either not paid rent before or just simply don't have the financial means to consistently pay rent for your property, right? It is never a good idea to just go on gut feeling when you're trying to get into this kind of contract with a tenant. So make sure that you are using comprehensive tenant screening, that you really understand the results. If you have questions on it, always ask. We have quite a few resources about how to read tenant screening reports so that you can feel confident in picking the best fit for your rental. In addition to that, once you have a great tenant, what you need to do is make rent payments as simple as possible, but not at your own risk. There are a lot of methods used today that look like they could be really great on the outset, but they just fall short, especially for landlords. So let's talk about them. These are things that I am calling our high-risk rent collection methods. They're things that have either worked historically and just don't really fit into the digital landscape as well anymore, or they are totally digital rent collection methods, but they weren't built with you as a landlord in mind. To kick this off, I'm curious, how do you collect rent today? How do you collect rent today? There are quite a few options here. There are no wrong answers. I am going to warn you about some of these because they do come up as popular methods, but feel free to be honest here. And if it changes month to month, if you are a really flexible landlord, and let's say you have a tenant who 1 month wants to pay in cash, but the next month wants to pay via check, feel free to let us know. That does pop up sometimes. As a cheeky little option, we do have gold bars as well. That is a throwback to one of our podcast episodes. If you haven't caught our podcast, it is called Adventures in Landlording. You can find it anywhere podcasts are. And there is really a landlord out there who is considering accepting gold bars as rent payments. We'll see if the two of you who selected that also actually do it. I would be fascinated to know. But for now, let's take a look at how this is shaken out. All right, so nearly 40% of you collect rent through TurboTenant. Huzzah, love to see it. We built this for you, and I will get into some of the ways that you can make sure you're using it to the best of your ability. But we also have people using common methods like Zelle, paper checks. We have some cash in the mix too. And, a surprising number of you allow it to change month to month. So I'd love to hear some of your reasoning, some of your explanations, what's worked and what hasn't in the chat if you feel comfortable sharing. But of course, you don't have to. So with this in mind, we have listed quite a few different methods of collecting rent, right? And these are the ones we're going to focus on in this conversation. Now, I'm not here to scare you. I'm going to talk to you about what works and what doesn't with each of these methods. And I just want you to have a full comprehensive picture so that you make sure that you are complying with your local laws as best as possible and trying to minimize the amount of stress that goes into collecting rent. So specifically, we're going to start with Zelle. We'll also hit on Venmo, cash, and checks before we get into how to automate rent collection 100% of the way. Okay. So Zelle, it's not just a fun word to say. It's really more of a payment app, and it specifically markets itself as the best method to send money to friends and families, not businesses. So while it is quite popular, and in fact, a lot of my friends pay their landlords through Zelle, there are a couple factors that you want to consider if that is how you're currently accepting rent payments. Specifically, each bank has its own daily and monthly payment limits. So it could be as low as $1,000 a day and $5,000 per month. Some banks even limit that further so that weekly sends are $500 or less. The average rent in the US is around $2,000, which means this might not be a good option for you if your tenant has a bank that limits it quite significantly. Additionally, there are a couple other things to consider with Zelle. Namely, it can be really easy to make a mistake and just lose out on rent money from the tenant side. And then, of course, you as the landlord are sitting there like, well, I didn't make the mistake and I still need that money. Causes a lot of friction and can get people behind on rent. Also, payments aren't especially trackable, right? There's no rent receipt sent automatically. We'll get into the laws regarding rent receipts here in just a little bit. but that can be a big headache, especially if it's required where you live. And this is perhaps the biggest thing that I hear people nervous about, partial payments go through instantly on Zelle. And in some states, if a tenant is getting evicted for non-payment of rent and they make any kind of partial payment, even $1, that can halt the eviction process and basically restart it. And Zelle doesn't enable you to block any kind of partial payments. So you're kind of exposed in that way. Not only is there that legal aspect of no rent receipts being sent automatically, but if someone is able to just send you $1 and restart a very costly eviction process, you are losing out on more revenue in addition to what they haven't paid you already. So it's something to be aware of. With that in mind, because I think polls are fun, I have another one for you right now. Have you ever had a tenant make a partial payment to stop an eviction process? Let us know. Sometimes this is new information for folks, and they're like, I didn't even realize people could make a partial payment. And really, it boils down to your state laws and your local laws. Some states allow this to happen, others don't. So definitely worth exploring. If you are not sure what is legal in your state, we have a ton of resources for that, so you can make sure to check them out. But for now, I'm launching this little poll. I would love to know if you've ever had a tenant make a partial payment to stop the eviction process. Please don't mind my cat meowing. She's very passionate about rent payments. Okay. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to click in and answer. It's pretty fascinating, the split right now. We're going to talk about it in just a moment. But with rent payments being so crucial to the longevity of your business, it pays to understand which methods leave you more exposed than others. So let's get into this. All right. Looks like 74% of you have had someone make a partial payment to stop the eviction process. Would be really curious to hear how that went in the chat if you'd like to share. And then we have 39% of you surprised that tenants can make a partial payment to stop the eviction process. It's true. And like I mentioned with Zelle, if they are able to just pay you $1 and restart the process, that can be quite a headache. All right. So let me just move this off my screen now. There we go. So we've talked about Zelle. Another common payment method that a ton of people use is Venmo. So what is Venmo? Well, it's basically an all-purpose payment app. So yes, there is an arm of it that is specifically for businesses at this point, but it wasn't designed with business needs at the forefront. In fact, by and large, it was created to send money casually to friends and family. You'll notice that that's a theme with Zelle as well. So it's something that is really accessible to people. That's why so many landlords opt to use that or to allow tenants to pay rent through these methods. But again, there are some different things to consider, especially like the weekly rolling limit here. So if you have a luxury apartment and your rent is over $5,000, Venmo is going to be a trickier beast for you, right? Because they have this weekly rolling limit. This is for users who have not completed identity verification. So if they complete it, it could be that they could send more. But this is just something to be aware of, especially if you are in a luxury situation and your rent is significantly higher. Here at TurboTenant, we do have plenty of landlords who have rents higher than $5,000. This would leave them in a bit of a bind. Beyond that, it is becoming more and more clear that Venmo doesn't have a certain friendliness for businesses. Specifically, at this juncture, they charge a 1.9% fee for every business transaction, which is soon to increase. As of July, that'll be a 2.99% fee. I ran the numbers yesterday with my social media strategist. If the average rent in America is $2,000 and about 2.99% of that, I believe, shakes out to roughly $60 per month that you're losing. Over the course of a year, that's nearly $700 that you are paying out. And for what? That could be your bottom line, but it's going somewhere else because there is this fee. Also, if you are trying to instantly transfer money, it's going to cost you extra. So at minimum, $700 out your back pocket, right? Also, Venmo allows partial payments too. It's impossible to cancel a payment, and this could really wreck your eviction case or at least start you back at square one. We all know how costly and traumatic evictions can be. So this is really something to keep in mind. It's way easier to plan ahead and try and put yourself in a better position than it is to get hit with this during an eviction case and have to just start over. Also, Venmo doesn't allow for recurring charges, which means you as a landlord are going to have to spend more time doing admin work versus a system that lets you set it up and then automatically charges your tenant. So these are some of the newer school ways of doing things, right? They are accessible. That is a pro. And a lot of your younger tenants are going to be intimately familiar with both Zelle and Venmo. There are also some methods that are older school and, while easily understood, are going to have some downsides as well. Let's start with cash. Cash is, it's tried and true. It's really familiar. Obviously, there are no extra fees incurred. It can be deposited immediately. Of course, that is going to require some extra admin work. Your tenant has to pull the cash. They have to give you the cash. You have to count the cash. You have to take the cash to the bank, right? But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. There are no additional fees. There are no additional sillinesses. It's just, here's the cash. There you go. Easy peasy, right? Wrong. I mean, yes, okay, right. Like, there are some definite benefits of cash, but let's take a look at some of the risks as well. First of all, as I mentioned, it is more time consuming than digital payments, largely because it requires a physical collection and then depositing of that money. That makes it harder for you to scale, and it is terrible if you are a remote landlord. In fact, I don't know exactly how you'd make that work as a remote landlord unless you're doing wire transfers, but that's a different story. Also, cash is really easy to misplace while being super hard to document properly. And what are you going to do if your tenant insists that they paid you in full, but you counted up and their payment is a few bills short? It's going to make it a lot trickier because it's going to be a he said, she said situation, and it requires you to do a lot more digging, which again is just more admin work that you don't have to be doing. Also, there is no automatic receipt when it comes to cash payments, right? You physically have to write one out each time that you get a cash payment. In some states, it is required for you to provide a receipt for cash payments, but again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. Another popular method is, of course, the old-fashioned check, right? Now, this is a really popular method, especially for older tenants. It's nice because it does create a written record, and it can be sent by mail or physically collected. So there are some pros to accepting checks. They can also be post-dated so that, let's say your tenant wants to give you all of their monthly rent payments post-dated, so you deposit one at a time, but that way they don't have to think about it. Checks allow for that. It does mean that you have to keep all of those together and cash them properly, which again creates a little bit extra work for you, but that is a benefit of checks by and large. Now let's check the downsides. Oh, I love my jokes. Okay, so the downsides of check rent payments. First and foremost, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. A lot of your younger tenants don't have checkbooks. They just don't. They might not even know how to write a check. It's just falling out of fashion. It's not something that people are taught in the same way that you might have been taught when you were in school. Also, checks take time to clear, which leads to delays, right? There's always a possibility, too, that you get a check and it's going to bounce. Not only could a bounce check cost you money, it's also going to cost your tenant money. And if they are struggling to make rent payments already, it starts to push them further down that hill and put you both in a worse position. Also, checks are inconvenient in a lot of ways, mostly because both parties have to handle them. And if they're being sent via the mail, they can easily be lost. And then once again, you're at best getting a delayed rent payment. At worst, you lose out on that month and maybe have to have a conversation about a formal lease violation notice or what have you. But there's a lot of downsides when you are relying on the physical world to collect your revenue. So what can you do to make rent collection compliant and easy? Well, there are a couple of things that I think of when we talk about rent compliance, right? Rental law compliance. First and foremost, the thing I keep sneakily alluding to are rent receipt laws. These are important, mainly because it's not something that a lot of people think about, and they can be very confusing. So as I note here, there are some cities that require rent receipts, but the state itself does not. So for our Ohio friends, Columbus has to have, if you are a landlord in Columbus and someone pays you, you need to be giving rent receipts. But the state of Ohio does not require rent receipts, right? It's down to the city level. This is also why we're always telling you, make sure that you understand the laws at your local level, because sometimes there are clashes between your state, and your county or your city. Also, rent receipt laws vary quite a bit in terms of how they're implemented and what is the expectation for landlords from area to area. We have a couple examples here. Hawaii and New York demand a receipt for every type of rent payment. So whether your tenant is paying in cash, if they're paying via Zelle, you have to be providing a receipt if you're in Hawaii and New York. However, Colorado only requires receipts for cash payments. So again, it can get as specific as the collection method requiring a rent receipt versus every single payment in that area or in that state, but maybe not that city or vice versa. So it gets really confusing. The best way to mitigate this kind of confusion is to avoid leaving legal compliance to chance. So specifically, I would recommend sending a rent receipt to every single tenant upon receiving payment. Better yet, you could let us do it for you. When you pay rent through TurboTenant, we go ahead and we fire off that receipt. That way you stay compliant no matter where you live or how you're collecting rent. I guess you're collecting through us. But no matter how it's going, even if you're logging an offline payment, this is an option for you so that you can maintain your compliance more easily. Also, if I can toot our horn a little bit, it is free. So with TurboTenant, you pay $0 to enable ACH credit and debit card payments, which is fantastic. That means that your tenant can choose how they're going to pay you, and it's going to be logged in our system. If you are collecting rent through us, we also track those rent payments. So you see here, this is a little snapshot of our payments dashboard, so you can understand at a glance what you are owed, what is in transit, what's actually been paid out. That makes it really easy to stay on top of your business, okay? Additionally, and this is something that I talked about at length with one of our wonderful education users, TurboTenant enables you to disable partial payments. So let's say you have a tenant. They've been great, but unfortunately they haven't been paying the rent and you've tried everything, but now you are at an eviction process situation, right? You need to evict them to reclaim your property. With TurboTenant, you can disable partial payments so that no longer can they just send you $1 and restart the entire rigmarole, right? Instead, that enables you to follow the court's guidelines and they can either pay you in full or otherwise mitigate the situation as it's intended without doing kind of a sneaky, really cheap workaround. Additionally, no one likes spending their time doing admin work, right? So let us do it for you. Our system actually automates all of these different components of rent collection, some of the most time-consuming parts between actually depositing the money into your account and also going after unpaid charges and sending late fees, right? So that's in addition to our rent receipts. These are all things that we could do on your behalf. So you put in one time what that late fee is going to be, whether it's a percentage of your rent or a flat fee. And then we will actually remind your tenants leading up to the day that rent is due that this is an expected payment. If they don't pay it, we let them know. We also let you know. And then we start pursuing those late fees accordingly. Pretty nifty, in my humble but correct opinion. And this is all for free. If you wanted to, you could invest in a TurboTenant Premium subscription. That means for one low cost per year, you'd be able to collect add unlimited bank accounts and get your rent deposits faster. So there are a ton of other perks in addition to that for TurboTenant Premium, but that's definitely something to consider, especially if you are someone who has a dedicated bank account for every single property or every single door that you own. Makes it a lot easier to just have your money go exactly where it's supposed to be so that you can focus on living the rest of your life, expanding your portfolio, etc. Also, something to note, not only are we helping you when you collect rent through TurboTenant, but we're also empowering your renters. As I mentioned, we send out automatic automatic rent due reminders so that they can stay on top of their charges and feel confident that they are not going to fall past due. To that end, we also enabled autopay. That means that your tenant can opt in and they can basically have their rent payment deducted every month, which means even less stress for you and less work for them so that you can try and get as guaranteed an on-time and in full payment as possible in this current landscape. Your tenants can also opt in to rent reporting. This allows them to build credit based on positive rent payments, right? So on-time payments get reported to TransUnion. That helps bolster their credit. That also makes them more willing to pay rent on time and in full because they are benefiting too. This is a pretty good sell. People tend to enjoy that feature, and it could be really useful in terms of bolstering your landlord-tenant relationship because, let's face it, your tenant is not likely to rent from you forever. But if they do, heck, they have this wonderful credit score that they have built by simply paying rent on time and being a good tenant. So it's always an interesting thing, definitely worth exploring and seeing if your tenants would like to opt in because it is to their benefit. Something worth knowing about, right? Okay. I'm just going to pause while we're right here in case there are any burning questions coming in. Evangeline, how much is the charge? Well, Evangeline, I think you mean how much does it cost to collect rent via TurboTenant? And you can do it for $0. Your tenant pays a fee depending on what rent payment method that they use. We could talk a little bit more about that in the chat if you are curious. But for you as the landlord, you do not have to pay anything to collect rent through TurboTenant. Okay. It's easy peasy. You can opt in to TurboTenant Premium. There's an annual fee for that. But again, that is not required if you want to collect rent from us. There are just some great perks that you get if you go that route. Okay. And let's see, anything else here? Can they pay via Western Union? That is a good question. I'm going to ask our wonderful Danny to answer that in the chat. If a tenant pays late, will it show on their credit if they do have the credit reporting on? David, not currently. So right now it only reports on-time rent payments, which is what incentivizes them to properly pay where they're supposed to. Just something worth noting. Carl says, in California, we are not allowed to restrict payments to online only. That's really interesting. I think you could still offer online payments. I don't know the specificity with that law, Carl, but that is worth bringing up, so I appreciate you doing that. Okay. Interesting. Can a landlord see anywhere if our tenants enable autopay or not? So what you can do first as a landlord is make sure that they are allowed to set up autopay. So we have plenty of support articles to help you do this. You click a button, and then in terms of being able to see it, I will defer to Danny. She is very smart and she knows a lot about this. Okay. Bounce checks are the biggest downside. I agree. No cash for me. Most of my tenants use TurboTenant. Love that, Justine. Denise says, some do not trust online or payments or technology. Yeah, Denise, it's true. There are a lot of folks who don't trust technology. And when it comes to making payments online, especially where you have to provide your bank account information, they can get really hesitant. That's why we work with some of the top security processes out there. We are really dedicated to protecting your information and your tenant's information. So if that is a concern, we can talk more about that too, but definitely worth knowing because again, I think that we are making it safer and safer to pay rent online and streamline it too, but we just have to let everybody know that this is an option, right? Okay. I see some mentions about my cat. Yeah, you saw the small cat. So I don't know. She just likes to be in the mix sometimes. But she doesn't pay any rent, so she's not great at this conversation. Okay. Let's see. Anything else? Okay. Great. So what are the expenses for the tenant? yeah, we can give you some more information about that. It looks like Danny has provided it up above. So debit and credit card payments have a 3.49% fee. ACH will see $2 unless you are a premium TurboTenant user, which is very important. Okay. All right. So let's keep trucking along. We've got a little bit more information to share here. Ram, there is technical help and app support for tenants. Tenants have the same access to the support team as landlords. So they can go into their portal and they can ask there. They can also email support@turbotenant.com. So there are options, and there are also plenty of support articles to help them get set up if it's more of a setup issue. But definitely we love to support both our tenants and our landlords. Let's see. Fritzy says, I noticed TurboTenant's site is down often. How does that impact payments? So I would say, from my seat as someone who gets a notification every time that the site is down, it is not down as often as it might. To me, it's not down that often, right? But I respect what you're saying. You've seen it where it's come down. Does that affect payments? I think it might impact someone's ability to make a payment that minute, but very rarely do we see that happen in typical rent collection times, right? It just doesn't. We're really dedicated to making sure that your tenants can pay rent when they need to. So we don't really see it pop up when people are trying to make rent payments at the beginning of it. Okay. All right. Great stuff. Danny and Jonathan are giving you great information. Walton, okay. 1099, it's the IRS if TurboTenant accepts payments. So there are some sticky bits when it comes to 1099. We have written an article about this. So let's see here. I am going to go ahead and provide this to you. Okay, this is specifically for you. I don't want to get into the meat and the confusion of IRS forms right now. But if anybody else, Danny, Jonathan, want to chime in, feel free. We're just going to keep trucking along for now, and then we can circle back here shortly. All right. So in terms of your rent collection, if you are currently using Zelle, Venmo, Cash, etc., I would highly recommend that you consider switching over to TurboTenant, because you can spend less than 10 minutes to effectively take back your time. You can stress less knowing that we are going to remind your tenants of upcoming due dates and unpaid charges on your behalf. You'll also stay up to date on your property's finances. You can see how your expenses stack up against your rent payments with a fraction of the admin work. We're also going to be tracking all of this for you so that you can just see at a glance, which is really important, especially if you're someone looking to scale. Also, we'll help you comply with the law without breaking a sweat, right? So don't worry about the complicated rent receipt laws, whether you're collecting rent through this method or that method, or if your state allows one thing but your city doesn't. We will keep you compliant by automating these records. And that's really at the heart of what the ultimate rental strategy is. You need to automate as much as you can without losing that human touch so that you can, again, focus on whatever else needs your attention more. So if we are automatically reminding your tenants of upcoming due dates, unpaid charges, late fees, etc., those are tasks that you no longer have to have on your plate, which is so important, especially if you are looking to scale. Okay? So all of this is to say, we've made it really simple. You could take less than 10 minutes and just make sure that you are all set up. You send out a little invitation to your tenants if they're not already using TurboTenant and get set up. We have robust support via via email and chat. So feel free to leverage that. If you are a premium member, you also have the option to schedule a call with us. So keep that in mind. You can chit chat with us if that's easier for you. But we want to make it so that you are able to do whatever you want with your rental business. And that means taking off some of these tasks from your plate, right? So don't feel like you need to muddy the waters or get into the nitty gritty or start having fights about, how many bills are missing from a cash payment. Get online, bring it into the current landscape so that you can feel more confident as you try and do whatever you need to do with your business. If you are looking to get started and you're not exactly sure how to do it, these are the step-by-step instructions. So all you have to do is go into your TurboTenant account, and then you'll click on the Payments tab. You can follow each and every one of these steps. So inherently, you're making charges for each lease profile. You can choose to have that be recurring charges or one-time charges. You will then put in your information through our Stripe integration, verify all of that. You then get to decide on the permissions, right? So if you're going to enable partial payments, awesome, you can. Remember, you can always turn that off too, so it's not something that you have to allow forever. You can then make sure that you allow automatic payments so that your tenants can auto pay, and of course, automatic late fees. So you're putting in that information once, and then we will handle the rest from there. Once you enter all of that information in, you will be able to review all of it and then complete setup in just a click. After you do that, you will see an awaiting approval banner while our team checks your info. This is, again, part of that safety component to make sure that everybody is who they say they are so that you feel as confident as your tenants do when they go to pay rent through our portal. We will then email you as soon as you're ready to start collecting rent payments. So if you were saying, Krista, this sounds great, I'd like to start collecting rent right away. Wonderful. Jump in. I'm going to send you this deck within 2 business days. You can follow this slide step by step and feel more confident about how you're running this aspect of your business. I will say, if you have multiple businesses that are all collecting rent payments, we do recommend creating an entity for each of the businesses. Let us know if you have questions about that. All right. So let's check here. If you have your phone on you and you're interested, maybe you want to have unlimited bank accounts or otherwise make sure that you are taking advantage of everything that Premium offers, you can go ahead and scan this QR code. That will take you to the Premium subscription page, put in your information, invest in yourself, and see what happens. But for now, let's take another look at the chat here. Okay. All right. So some really awesome stuff in here. PM says support is very responsive. High five. I agree. I think our support team is one of the hardest working teams I've ever met specifically. I mean, everyone at TurboTenant tries to go above and beyond, but the things I've seen our support team do and the care that they take of each customer is just really impressive to me. So highly recommend chatting with those folks if anything pops up. Let's see. Yes. Great information from Jonathan. Okay. Information for Kay. Wonderful. Fritzy had a question about Section 8 and how to collect that. Wonderful. Okay. Yuan says, I allow 3 days grace period before the late fees come in. And Danny answered it. Yes. So tenants will be notified for custom due dates for your late payments. It's really important. Elena, yes, this is being recorded. You will see this again. We will send it out to you within 2 business days of the presentation. So keep an eye out. As an attendee, we'll also have some exclusive downloadables that you can check out, which are really cool in my humble opinion here. All right. Okay. David says, I love TurboTenant. Thank you, David. That is very sweet. Shola says, and this might be a great question for Danny if you feel comfortable coming off mic, but no pressure. How would a tenant pay their security deposit? Through TurboTenant or certified check?
Hello, Shola. So technically, you can collect either of those payments whatever way you want, but you can set up a security deposit through TurboTenant. You would just need to set up a lease profile, get your tenant connected, and get that charge created. Once that charge is created, it gets sent to them right away, where they can get their bank account set up and get that paid directly through TurboTenant to get deposited directly into the bank account of your choice.
Love it. Another question here from Roslyn. Can a tenant dispute a rent payment?
Technically, yes. Anybody can dispute any payment that they make. If there is any disputes through TurboTenant, our trust and safety team does notify you as soon as we do find out, and we work with you and the tenant directly.
Beautifully said. David asks, is there a standard late date nationally, or does it vary state to state? You're right, David. It does vary state to state. So some states have very specific set dates where it's like 5 days after rent has not been paid, then you can XYZ, but it does just vary not only state to state, but county to county. So I would highly recommend checking out. We have a great collection of state-specific laws that you can check out as a good starting point for this research. Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link for that in the chat, that would be lovely. Thank you. Right. And you mentioned Oklahoma is 5 days, New Mexico is 3. Yeah, it gets gnarly. There aren't a lot of overarching laws for rentals across the United States, which makes some of these conversations really complicated, especially if you are a remote landlord looking to expand into various states. Super important to know. What else do we have here? Okay. So Shola, good question. So if a tenant pays the security deposit via TurboTenant into your bank account, are you not commingling funds? I thought security deposits are deposited into a trust account. So Shola, it's one of those kind of complicated situations because security deposits also vary state to state and sometimes county to county in terms of what you can and can't do. I would love to let you know that we have a webinar we just did about this. So if you'd like to check that out, I would highly recommend. That'll give you a good primer on general laws, general best practices with security deposits, but it's going to depend on where you are collecting rent in terms of where you can keep that money. By and large, best practice is to separate out those funds. So if you have one fund specifically for security deposits, let's say you're a premium TurboTenant user, you can direct the security deposits fund to that bank account and then keep the rest in a separate account. Okay. All right, got some compliments for IT. Wonderful. We love them. Okay. Oh, thank you for dropping that webinar. All right. With our experience for the disputes, Danny, would you say, how would you say that typically shakes out? Is it in the landlord's favor, the tenant's favor? Is it hard to say because it varies person to person, case to case?
I would honestly say that it varies, just depending on the situation that you have with your tenant. Again, our trust and safety team will always look as far as they can into it. Ultimately, if you have questions about a dispute, when you're notified of a dispute, which I hope never happens to any of you, you can always reach out to our team and definitely ask more questions with that.
Wonderful. Thank you. What happens when a tenant disputes their last rent payment and or reports it as fraudulent to the bank? Ooh, Danny, is this something that you've seen happen before? If not, I can take a crack at it, but it'll be more based on research than experience.
That is not something that I have seen before, but I'm sure it happens, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is super unfortunate. So I would say, Lynette, couple thoughts here. One, going back to the security deposit, right? Let's say it's your tenant's last month in the rental. They do not pay rent. You are holding that security deposit. By and large, security deposits can be used to pay for rent that has been missed or any other fees that they've incurred, right? Whether that's utilities or what have you. Again, the ways that you can use security deposits vary from state to state, locality to locality. But again, by and large, if they decided to skip out or they reported their last rent payment as fraudulent, you still have security deposit money that you would then be entitled to keep in most areas. Please check your local laws. Highly recommend that because that's one of your best defenses against that kind of bad behavior. If they report it as fraudulent to the bank, that opens up a whole can of worms. Obviously, it's not fraudulent. You guys are in a committed contract, but it would require more admin work on your part, depending on how you collect rent, what's going on with the situation. If you have a lawyer or someone on the legal side of things, they could likely help you out and try and resolve this by using your lease as proof that this is not fraudulent. But I hope you never run into that situation because it sounds very sticky. Other than that, you guys have been absolutely lovely. Always a pleasure to see you. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your May and great stuff coming in June. We will catch you next time. Have a great day. Bye for now.